Excel has any number of rounding functions, and they're displayed here in column I. Let's take a look at some of these. The most obvious and the most frequent one to be used is likely to be, for most people, the function called round. Now, let's look at something pretty basic and yet something that many Excel users overlook. In column A is a simple formula in A7 that adds the cells above. And no real mysteries here, nothing unusual going on. And certainly I don't think anyone would display this in a rounded form, but you can do this. And here's where the mistake comes in sometimes. And I think in this example, it's so obvious that you wouldn't do it, but we'll show you other situations where this might happen. Someone makes the decision to say, well, we should just round this display. We don't want to see the decimals. On the Home tab in the number group, you may well be aware of a button that decreases the display of decimals. And that is the way to say it, decrease decimal. Show less precise values. Now we're not changing the value here, but as I click this, keep your eye on column A. Now, who would ever leave this in place? 5 times 5 is not 23. And yet, what's the real value here? Did we really change anything? We changed the appearance, but not the content. And it's pretty obvious that we wouldn't leave it this way. Probably what we might do, or at least one of the things we could consider doing, is press the comma, either leave it like this or possibly show just one decimal so that it makes sense. Now, let's show how this might be misused. We're going to calculate a new price for this item here and all the rest in this column here by simply writing a formula to take the current price times, and all these items here are going to be increased by 4.36%. That's in G1 here. We want to copy this down the column, so we'll press the F4 key to make that be an absolute address. We'll add this onto the original price, and here's our answer. And we'll copy this down the column. Now, to the right of this is a formula, and it actually calculates this amount times 10,000. But you're seeing this and saying, well, wait a minute here. Wouldn't that be 90,000? Well, this suggests something's a little strange here. Is that really $9? Let's show more decimals. Let's see what's happening here. As I show more decimals by increasing, the calculation to the right will not change. So I'm not changing the value here. I'm changing the display. So the real value of this new price is not just $8.99, but there's 0.58 cents left over. It's actually there. So what should we do in this situation? We will not be using the buttons here to change the amount. What we really need to do is to use a function called round that truly will change this. We put round in front of this and then left parenthesis, and we can round this to any number of different digits. If we put in comma 2, we're rounding this to the nearest 2 decimals, or in common parlance, the nearest penny. That's probably what we want to do. And as I press enter here, the result truly will be $9, and that calculation in F2 will be exactly 90,000. And of course, we eventually would redisplay this with only 2 decimals and adjust our other entries as well. Now, just a quick look on some of these as we increase the decimal. You see what's going on here. Now, we truly would want to round those to the nearest penny. Now, in column L, we see a similar kind of calculation with salaries. Same idea here. We want to show the existing salary times a certain percent and then add on to the original salary. And you might be thinking, well, who cares about the pennies here? Why don't we just get rid of them somehow? Well, we certainly could do that. And in a calculation like this, by the way, if we want to copy this, we'd make this absolute with the F4 key. But let's consider how we might want to round this particular set of numbers. We might want to round yearly salaries to the nearest dollar. And in that case, we wouldn't use 2, but comma 0 to the nearest dollar. And you see what's happening there. Drag down a few to see what's happening to the nearest dollar. Notice in the second case, we're about to change that into 69533. One below it, 80096. So this is, again, truly changing the values by using the round function. I've seen salaries in some organizations that are calculated to the nearest $100. Let's hope that the people seeing the calculation don't see the original numbers maybe, but we'll make this be a -2. Now, there could be times when you want to override or change the meaning of rounding so that the rounding goes up or down. So in the example here, I'm going to press Control-Z to go back for a second here. This is 265. If we choose a function called round down, this is going to end up being 37,200. Possibly we want to do this, not tell our recipients necessarily. Round down. So it overrides standard rounding rules here. That 80096 goes down to 80095. We're rounding to the nearest. Now, if we do this with 100, meaning we use a -2 here to the nearest $100, it's certainly going to be a more dramatic change. This moves down. And then as I drag this downward, you see the 80095. What is it going to be? 80,000 exactly. And sure enough, there's the opposite of this. That's round up, a more popular decision with this list for sure, but see what's happening there. So you want to explore that a little bit. Round is certainly the most common. This allows us to override standard rounding rules by moving up or down. And in all these cases, too, you're in control of how many decimals. Now, less likely to be used, but you want to be aware that they do exist, are 3 related functions. Think of these as being parallel to round, round up, and round down. And this has to do when we're dealing with values that are not multiples of 10, or decimally oriented is the better way to say it. Maybe on the pricing here, for whatever reason, we want a calculation that uses the 4.36% as a starting point, but we want to take the result and round to the nearest nickel, for example. So we'll use mRound here, and then instead of the 2 here, we'll put in 0.05. Now, in the example here, it's still going to take it to $9. That's okay, but it's going to make some changes here and there as we round these to the nearest nickel, and we see what's happening there. And sure enough, if you like to round upward no matter what, it's not M round up, it's actually called ceiling. That'll take us to the next 5 cents upward. And that certainly has a specialized use, but we could be using that there. And so the next one, for example, 3.35, a lot of these are going to stay the same, but some of these will go upward. There we go, that one's changing, so on. And sure enough, the opposite of ceiling in real life, as it is here, is floor. So some of these you might want to go the opposite direction. So that's in parallel with the round down function. And certainly less likely to be used, but another possibility here is int, meaning integer. And this function simply truncates or throws away pennies. It keeps just the integer value. Possibly you could use it here if we use int. Again, thinking integer. And we no number out here at all whatsoever. We simply are, in effect, throwing away the pennies. That's all it does. And you might look up on your own odd and even. I'll just a quick look at these two. I rarely use these, but here's an example here. I want the next odd number. Odd here simply picks the next odd number from this value looking upward. Same thing here. And sure enough, there's one down here called even as well. But the main focus of these is to recognize the idea that there are times when you need to change the result of a calculation. By no means do you want to rely upon formatting buttons available in the ribbon. These functions actually change the result of formulas and are the ones you should be using when you run into these accounting issues. Round, round up, and round down in the companions for non-decimally oriented information, mRound, ceiling, and floor.